What if it was destined? Wasn't it always you and me? What if it was destined?
Welcome to Season 8 of the Life Giver Podcast. I'm your host, Corie Weathers. I'm a military spouse, clinician, and leadership coach, and Life Giver is where I get to spark honest conversations, interview experts, and encourage you with topics on military culture, marriage, and leadership. So give yourself permission to pause and lean in. There's something for everyone here.
What if it was destined? Wasn't it always you and me?
Welcome to another episode of the Life Giver Podcast. This is your host, Corie Weathers, and I have a guest with me.
Hey, what's up, everybody out there in Radio Land?
It's my husband, Matthew. And I was thinking, Matt, it's been a while. I want to say it's been since the Afghanistan withdrawal, since I had you on the podcast.
I don't even remember that one. I remember the one where I actually interviewed you in Charlottesville. That was the last one I remember.
That was 2015. So
That was a while back.
we're catching up. And this has been a leadership series, and I thought, Matt's home this week, and I just have to give you an overwhelming, huge shout out because we have done so much content working on another project together. We're both really tired, and our voices are probably tired too. And thank you for being willing to join me for
You're
a podcast
welcome.
episode as well.
Yeah, well, we would be sitting downstairs and talking, so why not record it and put it out there for the masses?
There you go. There you go. So, we are on a leadership series of
Yes.
the podcast, and we've had, I've had Peter Docker,
Mhm.
who's incredible, talking about leading the next generation,
Mhm.
leading from the jump seat. Paul, who talked about servant leadership.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, what would be a great topic next. And so you came up with one.
Okay,
What was it?
so years ago, when we were working in a church, and the church was doing a lot of work on, it was really centered on John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership. And so that was something that imprinted on me early on, of those levels of leadership. And as I've joined the military and watched that over time, one of the things that stood out to me, if you're not familiar with the 5 levels of leadership, we're actually only going to go up to level 2, because most of the people that I see actually never go past level 1. And level 1 is positional leadership. And level 2 is really like personal leadership. Like, people follow you because they want to. And so there's this thing, this concept that I think will resonate when you're talking about leading the next generation, is this idea of like, what do you have to do to earn the followership of the people that you're leading? And by that specifically, I mean that just because you have 1 million followers on a social media thing doesn't mean you're leading them to do anything. It means maybe you're influencing them, and probably influencing a whole lot less people, because let's be honest, they're not followers. You have 1 million consumers. You have people that are consuming the content that you're putting out there, but to what end? For what purpose? Do you have an intent? Do you have an agenda? Do you have somewhere that you're wanting to move those people towards for a reason? And not simply, probably not even like next level, not just for your own purpose, your own agenda, but like to invest in them, because you believe they will be better if we all go together to this place, to this next level, to accomplish this next thing. That's really what I'm talking about. When you talk in the Army, you talk leadership is providing purpose, direction, and motivation. Purpose, direction imply that there is a reason we're doing this, and there's a place we're going towards, right? It's not simply motivation or influence. So leadership is like, what is it that we are striving for, and what's the deeper intent behind that? And then how do I get you to go from A to B, as well as enjoy the journey? Because I remember platoon leader.
That people would voluntarily follow you,
Yeah.
not because of a position that you're in, but
Right.
because they want to follow.
Well, yeah, but even at that, like I can't give orders.
Yeah.
And because I can never take, quote, command, and I can never give orders to go do X, Y, or Z, even if I'm the most highest ranking person within the group, I'll never have positional leadership. I mean, they may respect rank, but I can never say, go do this, and people will have to do that, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to rely on personal leadership. Like if I want to influence people to move in a direction because I believe it's good for them.
And that's the question you're asking is how do
Right.
you get people to voluntarily lead? Not
Yes.
because you have a certain rank and that people are doing something because that you are an authority figure over
Right.
them, but more so just voluntarily influenced by your direction or
Yeah.
your leadership style.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really interesting question because from a strengths perspective, you have a lot of influencing strengths in your top 10.
Right.
Now, I have shared openly, especially in the workshops that I do, about you have self-assurance. I always give people, the example of self-assurance is you, because you are so strongly convicted that if you feel like it is the right thing to do, you can, let's just be honest, you keep talking about it until finally people are like, okay, fine, we'll just do that.
So my anecdote on that, which I thought was funny, was when we were in the career course, we went away for a retreat. They took all the chaplains and their spouses away for a retreat. And we were, I think, at the Great Wolf Lodge or somewhere, I think. And we did Strength Finder. And Brandon Moore, God bless him, Brandon Moore and his wife actually taught it. And they were running down the 34. And they were like, stand up if you have this, stand up if you have that, stand up if you have this. And we were several weeks into the course. And they go, stand up if you have self-assurance.
You were the only one,
And
weren't
I
you?
was the only one that stood up. And
Nobody's surprised.
Yeah. And what was funny was there was such knowing laughter.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things I'm like, I could apologize it. But here's what's interesting.
No,
Like,
I wouldn't want you to.
so here's what's interesting, why I think that developed in me as a signature theme. And then we'll get back to the followership if you got a second,
Okay.
right?
I'm going to sit back.
Like you're going to sit back. Cool. I'm really going to lean in and take it down a notch. So I grew up like when I was 7 years old, I had a diagnosed hip disease, right? And had to wear braces, kind of like Forrest Gump, but actually they're Scottish, right? So my legs were like spread apart. And I thought I was just, and I was for that time period in my life, I was a handicapped kid. I had to believe in myself because I was fighting all these lies that I was less than, that I was worthless, that I'd never, do X, Y, and Z. I couldn't run and jump like all the other kids, right? So there was something in me. There was a survival mechanism in me, in my brain, that had to flip a switch that said, you know what? Your parents believe in you, but you got to believe in yourself. And you have to believe that you have the capability of doing that. And I think that's where it came from. Like,
well, let me just push back on that from another direction.
sure.
What if that was already in you and it was the lens through which you channeled your ability to push through and endure, that it wasn't developed because you went through that, but you
like
actually persevered through that because you already had that strength to call
Are you like
upon.
the Oracle at Matrix?
I am.
Where it's like, don't worry about
I'm
the
really
face.
good.
Okay. All right. So I'll take yours. Because you're smart. All right. So anyhow,
But
that's where I think I first saw it. So that
but
much being said,
Let me
Go ahead.
actually say this
You were
is a
talking
very
about
interesting question. I
influencing.
know this is a very interesting question for you to ask, considering you have really strong strengths that influence other people into action naturally.
right.
Whereas I don't know if I have any influencing strengths in my top 10. So I think it's because I think that on one hand, we could argue, well, somebody who has the natural talents to influence people into action. I mean, when you stand up on a stage or even behind a podcast mic and you speak with conviction and you speak with, passion, people just start nodding their heads and they're just like, I'm going to go like do the thing that he's telling me to do because I can do it.
Everybody should move to whole wheat bread.
I know. Like you could give a whole spiel on that and people would go and do it. Like that's because you just say it with such strength.
Okay.
And I think that you have a natural talent where people naturally follow, voluntarily follow. And yet there's other people, I'll use myself as an example, that don't naturally, according to the Strength Finder, have those same strengths. So I think it's an interesting question beyond what you naturally have. What are the principles? What are the things that we need to think about even if you don't have your strength or someone else's strength, what is it?
So here's that second part of the principle. It is personal leadership, where they follow you because they want to. And usually they're following you, whatever it is, because you've done something in their life. And that's crucial. Like, positional leadership is like, I need you to do this thing. Personal leadership is, I'm just going to do this for you. And it's an investment.
How is that different from servant leadership?
It's not.
Okay.
I mean, but I refrain from saying servant leadership because I think that term gets bannered about a lot. People don't fully understand it. And maybe they think it's just kind of like, almost equate it with like doing a service project, right? Whereas personal leadership is like, I still need you to I need you to be involved. Like, I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to invest in you. And I think that's the difference of, I'm trying to get the best out of you. Like, I can individually see you.
Okay. So here's something. Okay. I've been thinking about this.
Okay.
Obviously, I've been working on this book. Comes out November 14th for those of you who've been tracking. But I've been thinking about this as I've been working on the edits of the book is, I think a lot of leaders, and this can be an actual leader with positional leadership that has a position.
You are in a role where you have like command or authority, or you're tasked to lead a group.
Yes. So we have that group of people that could be listening.
Right.
We also have those who are in maybe volunteer positions. And so let's just say off the bat, like, everybody has the ability to lead someone, even if it's just through parenting, through volunteer, through just your like who you are in the world. So it can be positional, but everybody has the ability to lead. Let me just say that. But I've been thinking about this as I've been working on the book, is because the book is also talking about some level of like, invest in the person in front of you.
Right.
Like, we may not be able to change the institution.
Yeah.
But the core of everything that I wrote is about, at the core of it, understanding who's in front of you, and also who are you going to be to invest in that person in front of you.
Yeah.
And that can multiply and change, I believe, the whole institution.
Yeah.
But as I've written all that, I think to myself, there's a lot of people in leadership roles that I just have in the back of my mind. They're like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the bandwidth to do that, especially when I've got stacks of paper on my desk or a million things to do. How do I also invest in another person, especially invest in their life, invest in their family?
Yeah.
So it's a tall order.
It is. Yeah. So there's a rule of 6. That's a kind of a standard rule. I don't know if it's in doctrine, but I've heard it enough that it sounds like it should be doctrine if it's not. But there's a principle that your span of, quote, command and control or leadership really can't go past 6. You're really being stretched. So you really got to find
6 people?
6 people that you're going to invest in, right? And if everybody is investing in 6 people, that's kind of why, if you look at the breakdown in the hierarchy from like corps to division to battalion down to platoon, really that span doesn't usually go beyond 6 unless it's like really, for a set amount of time, like for a task force. And then that's brought back to its standard set, right? You can't afford not to. And that's, so I look at the way that they have reshaped the talent alignment process within the Army lately. Beautiful, brilliant. They're leaning heavily into coaching. They're doing a rewrite of doctrine that's going to be coming out. So it's no longer just the counseling process. It's actually called, it's like developing people. I mean, coaching, counseling, and mentoring. And they're leaning into this thing of like, we can no longer afford to not invest in people. And that's going to require the courage to, going back to like what was said during a CGSC paper almost a decade ago. That was a paper that got, pushed around with the Army ethic, the Center for Army Professional Ethics, where it was called Lying to Ourselves, where it was like, we don't have time for all the things that we're told to do, right?
Yeah.
But we also do not have time to not invest in a mentor. And when it all comes down to it, those are the kind of things that not just keep people alive, but actually make for a great place to work and to live.
Yeah.
And so it's going to require professional courage for people to go, you know what, some of this stuff we need to alleviate, or we need to change the way this is structured so that people can have the bandwidth to be able to invest. And here's the thing, like, those investments don't have to be big investments of time. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part of it is sometimes you've got to tell people, you've got to give them the space and say, it may not be me personally investing in you, but I'm telling you, you're going to take that afternoon off and you're going to go do X, Y, and Z. And whether that is, you need to go into counseling and invest in your family, or whether you need to go get some executive coaching and get that done, because the Army coaching program is blowing up right now. I literally got a call from a guy in Wyoming the other day that was like, saw your name on the Army coaching list. Help me understand how to get better at X, Y, and Z. Right. Mm-hmm. So this is taking off. We're at the front edge of this, right?
Obviously, I've been studying massive amounts of material on generations.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a timely conversation because Gen Z and millennial, are asking for something different. They're asking for mentoring. They're asking for trust and authenticity. And they're asking for, they want to follow.
Yeah.
I think originally Gen Z, especially, I think starting with millennials, but millennials are in command and they're in positional leadership roles now.
Yeah.
And so, especially with Gen Z coming in, I think there was a lot of concern that, like every young generation coming in, that they're going to buck the system, they're going to question everything. And, millennials, that they do question everything. Everything starts with why.
Yeah.
And so as Gen Z was coming in, it's like, now there's all these questions about, why do we have to wear the uniform this way? And all kinds of pushback that could be because they're just younger, and it could be because they're Gen Z. And so I think it's become a really big question of how do we lead this next generation in this current force that for the longest time has been structured in such a way where you just do what you're told and you just fall in line.
Right.
And these younger generations are now coming in and going, I will fall in line on the things that make sense to fall in line with. But when it comes to the human dynamic and when it comes to relationship and the relationship of authority and leadership and all of that, it's a different conversation where it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
And they want to follow. They're not like just bucking the system and wanting to do their own thing. They actually want a relationship.
Yeah. So like, here's the thing. Like, number one, we're like staff members. We're the absolute worst. Like, we eat with one hand while we're typing and scrolling with our mouse with the other and keep doing work. When we talk about mentoring and investment, it is not just like it's not one size fits all, and it's not just in one way, right? So sometimes mentoring is informal of, we all go home at the same time. You don't have to tell it. You just tell people we go home at the same time because our families are important, right? And the soon to be confirmed next chief of staff of the Army, General Randy George, confirmed that for us when we were in his brigade. I mean, we did not go to the field on the weekend. It was just known. And so the thing you understood, he didn't have to come around and say your family is important. By saying we're not going to have you in the field on the weekend, you're going to spend time with your family. He communicated family is important, right? That's a mentoring moment. Very easy, very quick, doesn't take anything. Just you make the right rules and you enforce them, right? Second thing is tell your story. When people are saying, well, I'll do it if it makes sense. Well, it may make sense to me simply because I've been at this for 20 plus years, right?
Yeah.
It may make sense to me because I've deployed to Afghanistan twice, or I've done a rotation to Poland. Right. I've seen, it makes absolute perfect sense. And then when I'm looking at somebody across the table or somebody that comes and sits on my couch that is having a hard time with something, I realize, wow, there's stuff that I have forgotten that I know. And they don't know any of that. They don't know what they don't know. And I have forgotten that I know that. So then I have to tell a story, and I think telling our story, giving a narrative context provides reason and makes sense of things. There is time for, hey, do it because you're told to do it, right? But then there's also, the explanation where you're like, okay, here's why we do this.
So in the book, I call that mentor or adapt. That there's these times that we kind of have to face as leaders. Go, is this an opportunity for me to mentor, which might include telling your story and explaining context? And I need you to adjust and change and grow.
Yeah.
And so it's my opportunity to mentor you. Or is this an opportunity for me as a leader to adapt? That you're bringing something to my attention that may be uncomfortable for me. Like for a lot of leaders, I think it's a lot better than it used to be. But for a lot of leaders, there was a lot of clashing of family time versus how long do we stay at work.
So here's what I'll say, and I'm gonna create a phrase for adapt, right? Okay, so is it mentor or adapt? And this will register with leaders who have deployed into Iraq or Afghanistan, okay? Or maybe even Kuwait. I haven't been there in a while. And so ask yourself the question, is this a HESCO? And I've got to unpack that, right?
Yeah, explain that for other people.
Is this a HESCO? Okay, so up until the global war on terror, whenever people wanted to create positions of cover concealment that you could hide behind that would absorb, either shrapnel or bullets from the enemy, they put sand into bags.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere along the lines, I'm almost positive it was a junior enlisted soldier, somebody was like, what if we just dump the sand into big buckets? And it was this moment where they legitimately invented.
It's like a wall.
They invented wire things that were foldable, that could stack flat, that you could just unfold, and on the inside lining it was felt, and you just dump sand in there. Mm-hmm. And you went from a sandbag that was at most a foot wide to like a 4, sometimes 6 or 8 foot barrier full of sand. Mm-hmm. And you could build immediately and quickly simply because everybody was like, I got it. Sand keeps bullets away. Is there a better way to keep the sand in one place? Mm-hmm. And so adapting is like, is this a HESCO? Mm-hmm. And so I look at what 18th Airborne Corps had done with, I think it was the Dragon's Lair and other places where they're like, we're going to reward these brilliant ideas that bubble up. Mm-hmm. And so making it a place for brilliant ideas to bubble up, from boots on the ground. And then sometimes somebody going, hey, here's an idea, and it bubbles up, and you dialogue with them and go, that's a great idea. We used to do it that way, because history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes really well. And you may have to go, yeah, like we've tried that, it didn't work, or it may not work for this, or to go, let's give it a try.
Yeah.
And that's empowering to people. But when you're talking about when people say, well, why can't I wear, X, Y, and Z? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Stopping and just providing the explanation matters. But I think that's honestly I think that's the exception, not the rule. I mean, it's the easy thing to go to that people may want to have a weird, have a uniform change or a uniform difference. We've kind of tolerated that in various ways for decades. Mm-hmm. It's not like the big thing. What I'm talking about is how have we captured the heart of the people that are showing up now, and not just in the military, but showing up in the workplace. I
will say, as I go around and teach different environments, the sense that I get is that leaders are so busy, they're forgetting.
Yeah.
They're forgetting to invest. They're forgetting to listen. Yeah. I'll do workshops with service members, and because we're slowing down long enough to have a workshop and not be, doing what we're doing all day normally.
Yeah.
That's when they start to have a conversation, and that's where they learn something about somebody that they've been serving with forever. And it's like, how are we not knowing what's going on in the lives of somebody that we are actually doing real work with every day?
Okay. So there's more than a few things that come to my brain. And so I'm going to, the first one is 7 habits of highly effective people sharpen the saw. And it's the phrase from, I think, Abraham Lincoln, where he said, if you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 5 hours sharpening the axe. If we don't take that time, it's going to, it's principle of time management. Pay me now or pay me later. And if we actually don't invest in people, we're going to be doing their work down the line because they're not going to know how to do it.
Yeah.
They're not going to be fully invested in doing it. When you have to, like, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine that, we were in the same small group at CGSC, and Dave brought up this fact of like, he just can't convince some of his junior leaders why, spending extra time in the field, getting better at their craft and their profession matters. And he was beating his head against a wall, and we were having the conversation. And it's because we know why it matters, right? We've been on the other end of the pointy stick, and having to paint that picture and help people understand, like, no kidding. So there I was, and you don't want to always like lead and teach out of your war stories, but you have to make it real for people.
So, and I'm not picking on people for not knowing how to do this,
No, not
or
at all.
we're not shaming you out there if this is something that you're recognizing within yourself as you're listening to this, but it's kind of like we're hoping to just kind of turn the lights on, wake up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I was at a speaking event, and I had a service member that came up to me afterwards, and we had talked about the leading through the generations and all the different generations and what motivates them. And afterwards, he came up to me, and he's responsible for leading Gen Zs. He had a whole bunch of like 19, 20-year-olds, and they're, all over the place. And some of them are drinking too much, and they're being wild and crazy like, 19, 20-year-olds do.
Yeah.
And he was really feeling convicted at, I do want to, like, I see now that I need to develop a relationship with them. And he literally would ask me, how do I do that? Like, how do I develop a relationship with him and with them? And I just said, just start with asking questions.
Yeah.
Like, we get so used to feeling responsible to lead them that we find ourselves like knife handing and telling them what to do next.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we're talking about, especially with the youngest generation, we're kind of parenting through, you know, and that's okay. There's an element of that is parenting or being an older sibling too. And that's okay. But I think we can sometimes get into a place where we get so used to just telling them what to do next that we have forgotten that we can just ask questions about their life.
Yeah.
Like why? Like, why did you join?
Yeah.
Or what makes you want to come to work? Or who can I be for you as a mentor and a leader that makes you want to come to me?
So I'll go back to the eating lunch at your desk. Eating lunch at your desk is like, and I do it, I'm guilty. It's one of the worst things that you can do. And I lament, honestly, and I was talking to an older major, the other day, and we were like, gone are the days of the O Club or the NCO Club, where it was, hey, the commander would get, some of his staff together or some of his junior leaders together and would go, hey, we're all going to go to the O Club. So, bring your $10. We're going to the buffet and we're going to sit for 90 minutes and we're going to talk. And we're not going to talk shop. We're going to talk
life.
You can still do that. You can go to the DFAC and say, hey, guess what, everybody? First and third Tuesday at the DFAC, meeting at 11:30. That's your place of duty. And you show up, go through the line, get your food, and you mentor over food. It sometimes happens out in the field, when you can actually go through the line and sit on the back of a Humvee and everybody kind of gathers up, and that's when you have that informal, like, shade tree mentoring.
Don't you think that this has to do with breaking the environment?
Yeah.
Like, if we're always sitting at our desk, there's something different about meeting in a different place, or we say, let's all come to the conference room, or
So I saw that, and it's something endemic to our military. So 2012, I deployed with the Australians, and we did a mission readiness exercise to Australia before we went in August. Which was cool. I mean, if I'm going to have to do a TDY, Darwin, Australia is a place to go.
Yeah, don't rub it in my face. Sorry.
But like, you haven't been to Japan and Germany. Shut your face. All right.
That's true.
Moving right along.
Australia sounds so wonderful.
Moving right along. Okay. So
but you know what? That a lot of spouses just heard that right now, and they were like, I get it. I get it.
Right. Okay. So we're doing this mission readiness exercise. It's a U.S. brigade headquarters and an Australian brigade headquarters. We went there and they would, normally during a warfighter exercise or whatever, people are eating food at their desk in the U.S. military. They're eating food at their desk. They're grabbing it real quick. They'll go get a plate. They come back to work, right? In the Australian military, we were going to the dining facility together, and they had 3 different ones. They had enlisted, they had NCO, and they had officer. And you went and you sat down, and it was almost like restaurant service. And so most of us were like, what is this? Like, this is nice. And I'm sure the U.S. Navy is like, that's what we do all the time. But anyhow, so that was the first thing, right? We're like eating together. At 5 o'clock on the dot during this mission readiness exercise, they shut down. Like, they were done. And then when we deployed, we had these kind of all of our quote buildings were these 107 millimeter rocket proof containers that were side by side with all the doors facing inward. So picture like 10 connexes, like those containers you see that are on ships or whatever. Picture them long side to long side.
So it formed a hallway.
During the middle, and then they put a little cover on top. So it was like a Lego type building, right? Built of all these self-contained rooms. Well, on the US side, everybody kept their doors on. And you really didn't need to, because these were rocket-proof containers. We had HESCOs up. I mean, these things were like, you're not going to do any, like you couldn't even hear sound outside these things, right? So they kept all their doors on. And we had doors at the end of the hallway. So it was an enclosed space. On the Australian side of the hallway, they took all their doors off and just put them in a container. And then they had little benches that were outside. And they even had like...
Outside or in the hallway?
In the hallway, right outside their door. So it was almost like, just picture a hallway in a building where on one side they have doors that are closed, and on one side they have doors that are open. Mm-hmm. And while that can be distracting when you actually need to get deep think work done, an open doorway says, come on in. Mm-hmm. Right. And then there were a couple times it was like once in the morning and once in the afternoon, all the Aussies came out and sat down in the hallway and were drinking tea and socializing. And it got to the point where the Americans, a lot of the American staff just kind of opened their door and then propped it open. And they were like, they kind of like, people coming out of a cave, like started gravitating and hanging out in the hallway. And then we started this beautiful cross-pollination where it didn't matter like what your staff job was. We were solving problems that maybe you weren't tasked to solve.
Most of the time over tea in the hallway.
Most of the time over tea in the hallway. Tea and crumpets and these delicious little chocolates. So, and Tim Tams. Oh, the Tim Tams, right? So it was this social environment where work got done, right? And if you need to do deep think, you need to be able to close your door and really zone out. And most times people close the door, but they keep Outlook on and they keep Microsoft Teams on and they're still being distracted. They're not actually doing deep think. So if we actually segment our time and go, you know what? I'm doing deep think for 3 hours. The email is off. Teams and messaging is off. My phone is off. And I've got outgoing messages that say, I'm doing deep think. I am working on a problem. I'm strategically planning something and intending to not be distracted. And then I'm going to plan in 2 hours for, as the Aussies would call it, a walkabout, where I'm just going to go walk about and I'm going to check in with people and see where they're at and let them see where I'm at, And so you can.
So I think part of what you're saying.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think part of what you're saying when we talk about how to influence voluntary followership.
Yep.
Part of it is investing in the lives of people. Mm-hmm. And in order to invest in the lives of people intentionally, I'm also hearing part of that answer needs to be that we are intentional with the time that we have, so we have time to go invest in those lives. And you and I have been in the last week or two really diving into intentional, actual meditation.
Yeah.
And I mean, meditation is something that people for a long time have been saying is effective and helpful. And we have had a joke for the longest time every day. We're like, we should do yoga.
We should do yoga.
We say that, but we never do,
Yeah.
you know? And it really wasn't until the last couple of weeks that we were like, you know what, let's actually lean in to this. And one of the, I love Masterclass. If you've not subscribed to Masterclass, it's an incredible app with a lot of great material on it. But there's an incredible Masterclass on meditation. And one of the things he said was, if you can be more focused and attentive to just being present with the task that you're working on right now, and just give that all of your attention and all of your presence, it actually helps you get those things done faster. Like just being present with the thing at hand.
To quote Chad from the movie last night, be patient, be present, be deliberate, and continue working the plan. Continue executing the plan. It was wonderful.
Be patient, be present, be deliberate, and execute the plan. Tell them the movie. It's actually it's fantastic.
It was
documentary.
On Amazon Prime. It was, I think, called
1 Mile.
It's like One More Mile or 1 Mile.
Yeah.
It just an incredibly great movie, but it was it's a great metaphor for there's a lot that has to get done.
Just for context, this is a race where you run 1 mile at a time.
You run a 1 mile loop and you have to get it done in 20 minutes. And every 20 minutes, you have to be back at the start point for them to blow the whistle that you have to run another mile.
And if you can go faster, you can have a little bit of time to rest, refuel, something like that.
And every 12 hours, they have a 20-minute downtime.
But the point is you have a whole bunch of people doing this race.
There's no end to the race is you're the last person running.
Yes. So you keep going. Everybody is going until there's one person left.
Yeah. And so it literally
worth watching. Let's not give away the end, but there was one contestant, one guy in the race named Chad.
Yeah.
And that's
Former Navy SEAL.
That was his strategy.
Yeah.
He was like, be patient, be
present, be
deliberative.
Yeah.
And execute the plan.
And it really is like, if you are listening and you're getting overwhelmed going, I've got enough to do already, right? Here's what I'll say. I've been on staff for 16 years, right? There are a few staff jobs out there that, no kidding, like an executive officer and an S3, you're going to be working long hours. It's why that's the reason why you are, that job is a 1-year job. There's a reason that it's a 1-year job. Everybody else, though, what I've seen, hands down, almost everybody else, not every day is a 12 to 14 hour day. I've watched people like walk around and meander around and kind of shoot the breeze up until like sometimes like 1500. And they're like, well, time to go to work. And you're like, what? They haven't done like deep think and dedicated that time. And there are exceptions. Granted, there are definitely exceptions, but it's being intentional in those moments. And
in the moments that you have to be intentional for your own sake.
Yeah.
And really what we're talking about here is be present for your sake.
Yes.
Be present for other people's sake.
Yeah.
And you can't do one without the other. You can't, if you just accidentally live your life throughout the day, you're going to be stressed, probably half completing most of the tasks on your to-do list, and also probably being half present with whoever you're around.
Right.
And I think most of us do that day in and day out, in and day out.
Very accidentally.
And I don't know about you, but I get exhausted from getting half things done.
Yes.
Like I really am trying to, even today, I was struggling through doing the meditation. We've kind of, Matt and I kind of have this, I don't want to call it a bad habit, but it's kind of a thing where we like compete with each other a little bit. And so like if Matt is like doing his meditation and on top of it each day, then I'm like, I better get mine in. And so we kind of hold each other accountable that way, even though we're not like holding up that kind of measuring stick to each other, but I want to grow with you.
Sure.
And so as you're growing, I want to grow and I want to be challenged in the same things that you're challenging yourself in and vice versa.
Right.
And so I was trying to do my meditation today and I was struggling. Like my brain was all over the place. I could not like get control of just centering myself and giving myself that time to be present, because I felt like I needed to be in a million places at once. And it did calm me a little bit. And I think it calmed me in a way that I could not have done on my own.
Yeah.
But then once I got to my desk and it was time to focus, and I was able to just tell myself, just do this next one thing with all of the attention that I can possibly give it, and push everything else aside, put it on a to-do list if I have to, but just be present with this one task.
Yeah.
And it will not only get done, but it will get done well. And it will get done better than if I was not present.
Right.
And then that gives you, you know, to the guy's point on masterclass, he's like, you actually will surprise yourself on how much more productive you are.
Yeah.
By functioning in that way.
Like, here's the thing, like the one I did today was 20 minutes, and I looked at the time and I was like, cool, 20 minutes. I have nothing to do for 20 minutes. Years ago, I worked for a commander that really jacked me up mentally. And I had to go to a hypnotherapist, and I was like, hey, like, I'm a therapist, right? I got a degree in counseling, but I am messed up between the ears. I mean, this commander was bad enough that I had to stop people from shooting him in Afghanistan. Literally. And so I'm in hypnotherapy, and one of the first things I remember her saying was, just remember that you have nowhere to go, nothing to do for the next 30 minutes. And it's the first time I ever had this thought. You have nowhere to go and nothing to do for 30 minutes. And I was like, when you say that to yourself and you're like, I'm not a first responder right now. I'm not a doctor in an emergency room where I've got to be on pins and needles, right? I've got nowhere to go and nothing to do for 5 minutes. Set the alarm for 5 minutes and pause.
Yeah.
You know, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Put first things first. Sharpen the saw. Those 2 principles right there will dictate how the rest of your work life goes. And I think we've kind of maybe gotten off track.
No, we haven't, because.
But I mean, going back to, if you don't do those things, you will never intentionally invest. And sometimes, like this, sometimes intentional investment is 5 minutes before or after a meeting to go, let me reiterate my priorities. Let me tell you why this matters. Where you just go, all right, I'm going to focus us in on this thing. I need to get everybody back together on the same page. And in the Army, we have phrases like, you know, a common operating picture. You can't function in any level if you don't have a common operating picture. If you're all not looking at the same map with the same graphics, with the same intent, same goals, same priorities, in the same time and space. If you don't take that time, people will just do whatever they think. They will stay busy and do whatever they think actually matters. But you've got to always bring it back and go, let's all make sure we're looking at the same thing.
Okay. So what I think I hear you saying now is, on one hand, we've talked about in order to invest in someone else's life, you have to first, for most people, especially those that are saying, I don't know if I have time to do that, right? That we've got to slow down and be present in our own lives.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to pause and help you be more productive by being more present in your own life, so that you have room to then, when you go and you're investing in that one person's life, you give yourself the permission to be present with just that.
Yeah.
Because you've taken care of the other things and you've made the space to go do the walkabout, right? Like, you're not worried about the thing that's on your desk, because this is the time to do the walkabout, right? And so now you're able to be present in that. And then what I hear you saying now is that in leadership, we can bring that same sense of presence to the time as a group.
Yeah. And I think one of the important questions leaders have to ask themselves is, what am I choosing to do that somebody else can do? What am I choosing to do that somebody else can do?
I have an amazing assistant right now, and I have to ask myself that on a daily basis. So hard.
Because here's the thing, people get afraid.
Yeah.
They get afraid that these we talk about, you know, we're all juggling, you know, glass balls or rubber balls, and they have to, the big part of leadership is like, which ones are glass and which ones when they drop will break, and which ones when they drop will bounce.
Yeah.
Understanding the difference of that, because you're never going to be able to do everything every day. So there's the hard part is we have 5-meter targets that are right in front of our face every single day. But the 20-meter long-term target, the 200-meter long-term target that we have to constantly keep our eyes on and work that target is the investment in people. Because we may not see the return quickly, but we can guarantee there will come a point when that person needs to have skills, abilities, a thought process, a way of viewing things, a way of work. Like there, we can invest in the 5-meter targets for so intently that we miss the 200-meter target. And then when it gets to us, it's a big target because we didn't reduce it when it was far off. And so taking the time to do first things first, put first things first, sharpen the saw, and invest in other people. Because here's the thing. When you hit level 2 leadership,
Which is what?
Level 2 leadership is personal leadership. Like people follow you because they want to, right? And I think level 3 is like people follow you, but that people follow you because they want to, because you've done something for them.
That's personal.
That's personal. Level 3 is people follow you because you've done something for the organization, right? People are like, hey, like, look what they were able to do. Like, I think Phil Jackson, who was the head coach of the Bulls when the Bulls went on their crazy run in the 90s. Like you can see Phil Jackson.
You're so old.
I know I'm so old.
I'm just kidding.
I'm great with that.
I'm
right?
older than you.
Okay. So like Nick Saban, current coach for Alabama. People will say, you'll sit there and go, I'll go play for Nick Saban, you know, or whoever the head coach is for Georgia.
Because he's shifted the whole organization.
Yeah, shifted. But here's the thing. Nick Saban is what they call dynastic. Like he's had a dynasty. Like he has consistently coached people to win consistently over time, delivered
Which is not
results.
everybody.
It's not everybody. And when people go, I want that in my life, they want to go work for a dynastic leadership. And in the military, we have dynastic names, right? I mean, you talk about like General Odierno, General Powell, Colin Powell, you know, General Dempsey. These names still get mentioned. Those are just 3 that are touch points for me personally and professionally, where people are like, oh my gosh, you remember they said this, and people have stories, they did this. And, you know, oh, I met him here. And it was just, and you're like, they never talked to you personally, but you're like, but look what they did.
That's 3rd level.
That is dynastic. That's actually level 5, but level 3 is like Colonel Brown, Brad Brown. Brad Brown is easily level 4, if not level 5. But level 3 was when people, you know, you watched what he did in bringing people back together and completely leading a team. And
so those of you who are just listening, during the Afghanistan withdrawal, I interviewed Colonel Brown. He was our commander during that first assignment. That was pretty rough. Just a huge mentor and friend.
Yeah. So, and I even mentioned it. I talked to Steve LaRock the other day on Zoom. He's in Germany. And we both mentioned, we're like, isn't it crazy that it's been 13 years and that unit left such an impression on us that it's like, if Brad called up and said, hey, guess what? They just appointed me, you know, X, Y, and Z, and I need a team. You're like, okay, let's do this. Right. You know, because of what he did, not just for us personally, individually, but for the organization.
Yeah. I mean, definitely an organizational investment, but I would say he invested in the personal lives before it was ever an organizational investment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was crucial. And I mean, even with now General George, I remember when he was XO for the vice chief in 2012, 13, he came through Fort Stewart, Georgia. And I love telling a couple stories about him, just because I want people to know the caliber of the leader we have, right? And so I'm sitting there waiting. There's a bunch of chaplains. We were going to go do a sensing session because the vice chief's entourage was, you know, doing all kinds of weird sensing not weird, but all kinds of sensing sessions at 3rd Infantry Division. So all these chaplains are waiting in the hallway, and General George comes out, you know, then Colonel George, and he's walking by and he stops and he goes, he was like, hey, Matt. He wasn't like, what's going on? But he was like, hey, Matt, how are Corie, Aiden, and Jackson? And I just stopped and I was like, they're great, sir. Thank you for asking. Like the level of personal leadership that somebody that is the XO for the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army will stop and ask me how my family's doing and remember their names. Blown away. Simultaneously, when we were downrange, we were at a place where we were up on OP Mace. And a lot of our guys, their uniforms, because they hadn't had showers, they tried to send their uniforms down to get washed, and the kicker box got dropped from the Chinook when the Chinook took fire. So they lost uniforms. So their uniforms were kind of rotting off of them. They were just falling apart. And there was nothing any of us could do because, Colonel Brown, none of us could do anything for ourselves. We just had what we had. So when General George was up there and he called down to Jalalabad and he told the brigade staff, everybody go get 2 uniforms, put them in duffel bags and send them up to OP Mace. Mm-hmm. And we were up there when the Kiowas, God rest their soul, beautiful bird, when the Kiowas fly over and drop 4 duffel bags of uniforms. Mm-hmm. And you're like, that is level 2, level 3 leadership, Well,
and let me just point out for just a second, because, he is about to be the Joint Chief of the Army.
Or Chief of Staff of the Army.
Or the Chief of Staff of the Army. Yes, thank you. And I think that a lot of times it can sound like name dropping.
Right.
And it can sound like, I know this person because I know their name.
Right.
And I think the difference of what you're saying is that there's a difference between wanting to follow someone because of what you see them doing from a distance and their name.
Yeah.
Versus I want to follow them because they invested in my life and I trust them.
But here's what I can tell you. God's honest truth. I've talked to no less than 36 people who have worked for him personally on his staff or have known him and worked for him. And once you start trading stories and you're like, oh, well, what did he do for you? Like, who was he? And across the board, haven't met one person that thought ill of him whatsoever. And it's not because of some amazing thing. It was because of who he is personally.
Yeah.
And he led personally. And so it's just this amazing confirmation. I was talking to one of my chief warrant officers the other day, and we were excited about his confirmation because we're like, it's just continued good leadership because I've heard, so it's totally not name dropping because,
it's excitement. What I see in you is excitement that somebody's in leadership that you trust.
Yes.
And I think that is what the younger generation is looking for.
Right.
Everybody wants to trust those that are in leadership.
And here's what's interesting. So let's put it back in the context of mentoring opportunities, right? I share those stories and go, okay, this is who General George was for my unit. If I share that to a young captain that doesn't know, the chief of staff from, a stranger walking up next door, doesn't even know what that role or that responsibility is, and they're able to go, okay, so the person that is the chief advisor, the one that's actually in charge, that's what they did along. And you're like, yeah, absolutely. And people go, okay, if they trust you as a person and you're telling that story, then they trust them.
Yeah.
And trust is trust. And I'll use a mathematical term. Trust is transitive. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. If A trusts B and B trusts C, A will trust C.
Yeah.
And so that's how we scope
really
trust.
Change the organization.
It's exactly right. It's how we scope trust across the organization. And go back to what General Milley said in 2016. Trust is the bedrock of our profession. Mm-hmm. It is the bedrock. It is the currency that we deal in and day out. And if we do not have that, we have nothing. And if we have that, we have everything.
Okay, so I think to close, let me just ask this.
We're already done?
We need to be
just
done.
getting excited. This can't be a 2-part issue because I got nowhere to go.
We actually do need to go to bed soon.
Whatever.
We've been doing content development stuff all day. So
all right.
Here's I think if you were to summarize, speaking of equations, right? Yeah. If you were to summarize your question,
mm-hmm.
What are the variables? What does it take to influence people into voluntary followership mm-hmm. as a leader? How do you as a leader help other people want to follow you? Not because they have to, but because they want to?
First, from my faith tradition, there's a golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. And it's very simple. It just boils it right down. Like, if you want people to care for you, you have to care for other people. Mm-hmm. You give what you expect, right? And then there's another thing, like, even if you've never received it, you're still responsible. And there's a great article written on the Green Notebook. It's called From Me Down. So I think it's on the Green Notebook, but if you Google From Me Down, I think it's a lieutenant colonel that was writing that was like, realized when he gets into leadership, he may not be able to change the organization above him. But you can always shape the culture that you're in charge of and you're responsible for. From me down.
Around you.
Around you. Absolutely. Peer leadership.
And let me just also encourage that a lot of the millennials and Gen Z who want to have this two-way conversation with leaders, that want to be able to provide feedback, that they want to be able to shape in a positive way. Like they want to succeed and they want to see their mentors and their supervisors succeed as well. And so it is causing some clashing of generations, but what I'm hearing from them is I actually, not only do I want a positive relationship with my superiors, but I want them to succeed and I want them to succeed at leading me.
Right.
And so I want to give that feedback.
Here's what I would say. Like when people say they want to succeed, the Army defines what leadership success is. So this is what, coming from an OCT background and a former instructor. If you want to know what leadership success is in the Army, read the doctrine. If you want to know what it is in your branch of service, read your doctrinal branch of the doctrine.
You just lost half the readers. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I could lose you, but
readers, the audience.
Here's the deal. Like, those are the rules. Like, if we're going to play this game, right? If leadership is a game of football, we have to agree what the rules are. And doctrine is run, and this is how I actually, when I did, I'm gonna the video that I sent off to compete for Instructor of the Year was a video on training doctrine. And people may go, oh my gosh, that's so dry. I totally don't want to do that. I hate that. That's cool, right? I just need to let you know, we must not be playing the same game, because doctrine is the playbook for the rules of the game we're all playing when we're inside these organizations, right? So if you don't know the doctrine, if you're not familiar with the leadership concepts that are put forth in Army regulation and doctrine, what's your standard of success? Because by taking on the responsibility, by taking the oath, you're basically saying those are the rules I'm going to play by. And here's what I'll tell you. You'll find words like empathy, words like humility, words like consistency, fairness, impartiality. Oh, wow. Equal opportunity, right? Effective, non-toxic, it's not even just, we've taken it and just, we used to say we don't want toxic leaders. Now we're saying ineffective leadership. You could be not toxic and still be ineffective, and then you're no longer a leader and we remove you. So if you want to weigh in, if you want to participate in the conversation as a junior leader or as a junior soldier, read the doctrine, because we have to operate on a common vocabulary. It's the same way with medicine, right? No young people go into medicine and go, well, I don't think I'd cut the patient in whatever which way. If you're not using medical terms and terminology that respect the way that the body is built, senior doctors
lose respect, and
doctors are going to look at you and go, I don't think you've read your medical book. I don't think you took the anatomy class. Yes, we need to be aware. Yes, we need to be having those discussions, but always be aware that as an Army leader, I'm going to be taking this back to doctrine. And when people ask me questions, 11 times out of 10, I go, what does it say in doctrine? And if they go, I haven't read it, and I go read it and ask me that question again. And most of the time they come back and they go, oh, well, it was right there in doctrine. Yes, it was.
What I hear you saying is that a lot of this is in doctrine.
The
on
rules
how
for
to-
participating in this relationship are written in doctrine.
And they're not as dry or as cold
No.
as people might think when they hear the word doctrine, that
And-
there is things like empathy and it gives, here's what I think you're saying.
Yeah.
Doctrine and the rules of being a leader in this military lifestyle, regardless of branch, gives you permission to be a human and to treat others as humans, and actually the permission and the time and the space to invest in them.
This is it. Doctrine even says war is a human endeavor. And you have to, within humans, maintain the will to fight. I mean, that's an intangible something in the heart of an actual human. The will to fight. I can't measure that. That's an intangible. I have to sense that. And so if I'm not interacting on a regular basis, how do I know that that person not just has the will to fight if we go into combat? How do they have the will to fight alcoholism? How do they have the will to fight their predisposition towards anger and resisting that? How do they have the will to fight when they need to go study? How do they have the will to fight in order to overcome all of our tendency to be lazy and not do physically disciplining activities, right? So this is a wonderful human endeavor that it's a beautiful thing.
The opportunity.
You get the opportunity to do. There's no other, and I don't want to say petri dish like it's bad, but a petri dish is where things are cultivated. This is a crucible. This is both a crucible and a petri dish where things are cultivated and they are tested over time. In no other place do you get that opportunity to hone your craft as a leader and as a participant in a complex organization than the military. And if you read the doctrine, you can easily sit there and go, I can adjudicate myself on these three things. Great here, can do better here. And it's very well defined and put out there. So,
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is self-assurance.
I guess so. Yeah.
Matt, thank you for, thank you for everything that you've done this week for me. Like, I had so many projects, including
Maybe y'all worth that.
but so many projects that came at me all at once.
There was a whole lot of bark. Oh, I love
should shut this down.
Shut it down. Cut it out.
Matthew Weathers.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. Anything else you want to add?
Nope.
Thank you for joining me. Someday we're gonna have time to just do this all the time. Not podcasts on content creation all the time, but just more podcasts together.
We're gonna be in an RV with two little headsets, just rambling on XM Sirius Live.
One person is gonna listen. Just one.
You know what? If they contribute,
the rest would have given up a long time
press,
ago.
$19.95 a month.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining and listening to us ramble, and thank you for supporting the podcast. And we're going to continue forward in this leadership series. I have several amazing interviews and topics that are coming up. Again, the podcast comes out every 1st and 15th of the month, and I don't have any sponsors to this podcast, and so I count on you guys passing these episodes around and sharing it with people that you're thinking about as you're listening. And also leave me a review on iTunes so that other people hear about it and we have more downloads. Thank you guys. Thank you for listening to the Life Giver podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast or leave a review so others can find it as well. Were you thinking of someone else who would benefit from hearing today's episode? You can be a life giver to them by simply sharing it with an encouraging note. If you would like to connect with me or find out more about my work, you can visit www.corieweathers.com.